funded by the Lake Erie Forestry Assistance Grant Program from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry. Our project is entitled Tree to Stream, Forestry for Grand River Health. The Grand River is known as the cleanest river that drains into Lake Erie in Ohio, and this grant is helping us to target woodland landowners in the lower Grand River watersheds of Mill Creek, Ang Creek, and Talcott Creek. Much of the land use is forested and under private ownership, so our strategy to maintain this clean water is to protect the health of the woodland resources through educating forested landowners on healthy forest management practices. Even if you aren't in the Grand River watershed, we're glad you're here because the principles for forest management and keeping our water clean apply for every watershed. So as a part of this grant, we are planning, or we have 4 workshops. We started in September with a forestry field day on sustainable forest management at the Holden Arboretum. And in November, we held a webinar on crafting a woodland management plan and Natural Resource Conservation Service funding programs. Our program tonight is on protecting your woodlands, planning for the future, and early in the new year, we will schedule a timber harvest tour. So watch for announcements. Thanks, Mandy.
Perfect. Thank you, Maureen. All right. Just a couple of housekeeping. Just please try to keep yourselves muted. And just because we do have quite a few people joining in, maybe shut your videos off if you are not presenting. And then during question and answers, we'll have plenty of time for that. You can send messages in the chat. So Natalie is going to be monitoring that for us. And so you can send messages in the chat and we will cover those at the end. That way you don't forget about them, or you are just welcome to write them down until we get to that spot. And then you are welcome to turn your cameras back on if you'd like for the question and answers. But first tonight, we are going to get started with conservation easements. And that is Brett Rodstrom, and he is the Director of Conservation at West Creek Conservancy. So Brett joined the West Creek staff in January of 2023 as the Director of Conservation. He brings more than 20 years of conservation experience to the organization and is passionately invested in the West Creek mission. Brett grew up in Lake County and now lives in Geauga County and is an avid fisherman and outdoorsman. For the last 17 years, Brett has worked to protect and restore more than 15,000 acres, created dozens of publicly accessible parks, and has led teams which have raised tens of millions of dollars for conservation and restoration projects in Northeast Ohio. Brett's specific role is to work with the West Creek team to develop, restore, and link conservation projects focused on water quality and natural resource-based initiatives through strategic regional partnerships and support of community-specific conservation priorities. So welcome, Brett. And if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Yeah, hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get started with my portion of the presentation. Thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity to talk to everybody. It's great that we can all stay in our own houses and stay warm and
We lost you, Brett.
I said, Brett, I think we lost you. It's always that scary moment. Is it me or is it Brett?
It's Brett.
Okay. We'll give him a second, see if he gets back on. It looks like he might have been kicked completely out of here. So technology is amazing that we can all sit in our houses and join in, right? But it's not so great when it just decides to not work.
Well, maybe now I should add a few jokes.
That's a perfect time, Gail.
Okay. So, since staying on topic for tonight's subject, what was missing from the family's forest transition plan? Brett's waiting in the lobby. Yes. Anybody? Anybody? A lack of trust.
Oh. That's a
So
good
bad.
Am I
one.
back? Am I
You are
back yet?
back.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. Apparently I didn't share well. Let me try that again. Can we try that again?
Yes.
All right. Working on that right now. How's that look?
There you go. You're all set.
Okay. All right. I'll try that again. Everybody can hear me? Is that good?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I am Brett Rodstrom, Director of Conservation for West Creek Conservancy. As my bio says, I've been doing this for about 20 years now. I worked at Lake Soil and Water District for a long time, then an organization called Grand River Partners, and then for 15 years, I worked at an organization called Western Reserve Land Conservancy, which is another land trust that does similar work and works on a ton of conservation easements in Northeast Ohio. And now I'm at West Creek Conservancy, and I want to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do, and then transition into easements here pretty soon. So, West Creek Conservancy, we are a land trust, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that services all of Northern Ohio. So, from Indiana all the way to Pennsylvania and north of Columbus is generally where our project area is. We were founded in Parma in 1997, then incorporated in the year 2000. Oops, I got to go back. This is on a time here. In the year 2000, as sort of a friends of group that really started to protect one large project, one large property, an old golf course along West Creek in Parma. It was the last section of open space. That organization then grew from the year 2000 on and started working beyond the watershed of West Creek in mostly Cuyahoga County, then Summit County, and then in 2015 or so, it really expanded to different parts of Northern Ohio doing conservation work, both acquisitions and easements and all kinds of restoration projects as well. We protect and restore land. We also work on connecting land through bike paths and things like that. And I'll talk about all that in a second. We often work on very ugly projects too, landfills and Superfund sites and old industrial areas as well. This is the basic tools that we use to protect land. Fee simple acquisitions, that's when we buy property. It's also a tool that we use to buy property and then give to the different park districts or local entities that want those lands. We also take fee simple donations. People donate land to us, not only conservation land, but they donate their houses to us. And then we either demo those houses and roll them into parks, or we just resell those houses and move the revenue from that to move the mission forward. We do
Brett.
stream and habitat
Brett,
restoration.
say
Brett, your
Brett.
slides are not
Yeah.
advancing.
You're not
Yes.
on it. Yeah, do slideshow and then you should be able to advance from there.
Do slideshow.
On your on your actual presentation at the top where it says file home. I think if you hit slideshow, you should be able to.
Is that it there? Can you see
Yeah,
that?
but
Or no?
yeah, but what we see is like your editing mode, if that makes sense. It's not an actual like slideshow mode.
Because I see just the, so you're just seeing the editing mode? I see you, okay. So where do I hit slideshow at? I hit this button down here. Can you see my cursor?
No, no. Are you actually on your PowerPoint presentation?
I think I am, yes.
Okay, so at the top should be file home, insert draw, go across there. It should say slideshow. At least what I'm seeing from my side. There you go. Yep, from beginning, and then you can just advance to where you need to get.
Are we good now?
You have to go to the left and hit from beginning.
Oh, man. I am messing this up. Okay, so, from beginning.
Yeah.
Okay. Did I transition correctly? Does it look good or no?
It has not done, it hasn't went. It's still the same view.
Maybe try from beginning again.
Okay, from beginning. Okay, I just hit it again.
It's still not.
Hey, Brett, your issue is you're presenting the PowerPoint and not the whole window. So if you stop sharing, then share your window. You can share either your like PowerPoint or you can share your whole window. Just share your whole window.
Thomas, you are hired.
Yeah, whoever said that was great. All right, so if I go back to here and hit share, I want to share my screen or my window.
Screen.
Doesn't give me an option here.
Oh.
That or no.
No. Now we see your actual screen of what we all see with the windows and all the people.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us here.
Yeah, I'm so
You're
sorry.
good. You're good. Microsoft Teams is the worst in my opinion. So we're going to blame Microsoft.
I'm cool with that for sure. That's this.
When you shared your screen, you shared your screen of all the team meeting. You need to share your screen with the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Did it give you like options of multiple, like different screens?
Yeah, I mean, it does, but none of them are my PowerPoint.
Okay.
You got your PowerPoint pulled up,
It is open, yeah.
but do you see it on one of your screens?
I do see it on one of my.
So that's the screen you need to share.
No,
When you,
well,
when it-
I
when you
should
ask to
say.
share and it says, which thing should I share? You share that screen with the PowerPoint.
Why is this not working? Okay, let me start again. Share.
And it gives you options, right? Different screens to share.
Yeah, I can do the tab, the window, or the entire screen. I don't want to do the entire screen. I want to do the window, but the only window that I see is.
If you share the screen and then put the PowerPoint in presenting mode, it'll work.
This is the only option it gives me to share.
Yep. So then open up PowerPoint.
Now open your PowerPoint, yeah.
And then click from the beginning. There we go.
There we go.
Are we good?
Yep.
Did it transition?
We're good to go.
Did it transition?
Yes, it's moving.
Okay. We see a guy with a big tree here.
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna keep rolling. Somebody yell at me if it falls apart again. So the tools that we use to protect land are acquisitions, fee simple acquisitions, fee simple donations, where people donate land to us. We also do stream and wetland habitat restoration. We do trail acquisitions and access easements, and then what I'm going to talk about mostly tonight, and I'll transition through this quickly now, conservation easements and agricultural easements. Feasible acquisitions is when we buy property. This is a project that we're working on right now called Irishtown Bend. It's 25 acres. It's downtown. We've bought 15 separate different properties, the green area that you see on that map there. And we're restoring this to a world-class park that will eventually hand over to Cleveland Metro Park. So that is a $100 million project that we're working on right now with a bunch of partners. And I'm going fast now, so I'm trying to catch up here on time. Another example of this is projects that we buy and own and manage ourselves. Spring Creek Preserve, this is in Montville Township in Geauga County. It's 365 acres, big swamp complex. all kinds of interesting property there, big forest complex, which we're actively managing with Holden Arboretum, putting together a forest management plan so that we can manage our own forests and then make this available to the public. Example of fee simple donations. This is the Berman tract. This is when landowners leave us their property. Sometimes they leave us their property and they have conservation value. We protect them. Sometimes they leave us their property. For instance, a $200,000 house, $250,000 house in Parma. Somebody would leave that to us. It's not a conservation property, but we would take that gladly, and we use the resale of that property as revenue to help run the organization. So that happens somewhat frequently and more often than you would think. Another example, here's the Berman property. This is now 80 total acres. This is also in Montville Township. It is another huge wetland complex on the upper Cuyahoga River, which is just south of Aquila Lake there. We do stream and wetland habitat restorations. You've all seen these before, I would imagine, maybe not, but this is when we take a broken stream and we do find funding, millions and millions of dollars to come in and do riparian plantings, some regrading of channels. An example of this is a property that we bought in Andover Township. It was an old cornfield. This is a wetland complex that we acquired in the last 3 or 4 years. 120 total acres. It had been a cornfield since the last 100 years. It was adjacent to the bike path and one property removed from Pomatuming State Park. We were able to buy this property and work with a ton of partners to restore this to native pollinator habitat, forested areas that'll be growing over the next 50 or 100 years, hopefully, and a lot of different pothole wetlands in there. And this is sort of the before and after. Cornfield in 2022, 2024, we put all these tiny little wetlands. And I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but all these wetland complexes in here with pollinator habitat and reforest areas in there. We put, I think, a total of 50,000 trees that we planted on this property as well. So these are the kind of projects we work on. These are the partners that we work with. Everything that we do comes from a partnership approach, and we want to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible with all the partners. And they certainly help us all the way from the soil and water districts to NRCS to the funding sources like H2 Ohio and the park districts as well. So these are really complex projects, and they take a lot of time, a lot of money, but they're worth it. And then trails and acquisitions, this is what we're using to connect all these places together. The idea here is that we have the Emerald Necklace around Cleveland, but we want to make sure that people from the outer suburbs and even within the Emerald Necklace can connect to different parks. So we buy a lot of rail corridors, we build a lot of trails. This is an example of one that we just purchased in Ashtabula County. This is about 7 miles. It goes from Jefferson to Andover. It's an old rail bed. We bought the raw land this year, working with Ashtabula County Metro Parks. Eventually, this will become a bike path that connects Pomatuming State Park with the village of Jefferson, and hopefully over to the other Ashtabula County Greenway Trail someday as well. You guys asked me to come here tonight to talk about conservation easements, and so I am going to transition into that now. Conservation easements are a tool. They're a legal tool that goes on the deed that landowners often use. Hundreds and actually thousands probably of landowners in Ohio now have done conservation easements to protect their land, but the trick is that they get to keep their land. We've realized as a conservation community that all land that needs to be protected can't all become a public park or a public state park or a public wildlife area. So what sort of came about in the 1980s on the East Coast was this idea of a conservation easement, which would keep a 100-acre property or a 50-acre property or a 20-acre property 50 or 100 or 20 acres in perpetuity. The landowner gets to continue to own it, but they essentially extinguish. They don't really give up, but they extinguish the development rights on the property. This is a legal act of putting an easement on the property that does this. We work with landowners. Western Reserve Land Conservancy has done this. Ashtabula Soil and Water, all the Northeast Ohio anyway, soil and water districts, especially Lake County, has done this and put easements on properties. But these are voluntary agreements that go on the property. The landowner gets to continue to own the property. They still pay taxes on the property. but they have protected the property in perpetuity so it won't get chopped up into a subdivision or a dollar store or something else, a bunch of smaller lots. It is in perpetuity, so it protects the property forever. Even once the landowner doesn't own the property anymore, they leave it to their children, or they sell it to the neighbor, or they sell it to somebody from out of state. Whoever owns the property going forward is bound by those do's and don'ts of the conservation easement. The conservation easement itself can be very flexible. Some landowners have come to me in the past and said, hey, these are the trees that my grandfather planted and I never want them cut ever again. You can design the easement to do that, or you can design the easement to say, hey, listen, we want sustainable harvest allowances on this property. We want to cut this every 40 or 50 years, or whenever the management plan says so. And so you can tailor your conservation easement to whatever you want. There's building areas that are allowable. There's agricultural areas that are allowable. Conservation easements can work with oil and gas leases so that you're not completely boxed out of those things. They're very flexible, and typically they're donated, but there are some funds, less and less every year, but there are some funds that can purchase conservation or agricultural easements. We typically, as a land trust, like to have those easements 15 acres or greater, but we do hold some easements that are smaller than that. As a land trust, we are the third party holder of that easement, and so the land trust, like West Creek or Western Reserve Land Conservancy, or maybe the Soil and Water District, are legally responsible to defend the terms of those easements in perpetuity. So if you say no timbering, then no timbering has happened. The Soil and Water District or the land trust comes out every year. We walk the property. It's part of our stewardship package that we provide. We walk it every year. And if there's a violation, then we figure out how to fix it. Maybe it's a kid on a dirt bike or something that tore up the trails. We write a letter to the parents. We don't just come out of the gates and sue everybody. But sometimes easements, especially easements that don't allow timbering, sometimes they cut the trees. The neighbor accidentally, quote unquote, cut the trees, or they didn't realize. And so then we've got to get into lawsuits and defend the value of that easement. We typically, though, like to do easements that allow for the most flexibility as possible, but still protect the property from being subdivided ever again or built upon in any egregious way. So I hope I talked about this a little bit, but easements are focused on habitat protection and water quality. We are specifically looking at protecting the water resources on the properties, stream corridors, wetland areas, buffers around those areas as well. And then the easement, though, always allows for passive use of the property: hiking, birding, hunting, fishing, camping, any sort of restoration, invasive species treatment. All those things are allowed in easements, and then they can be expanded. The terms of those easements can be expanded to allow for, as I said, sustainable timbering or maple sugaring, or even subsurface oil and gas leasing. Again, 15 acres or greater. They're typically donated. But rarely anymore are they purchased, but there are some funds available through ODA that can purchase easements. That's a very long process. At West Creek, we don't do that process, but our cousins, our colleagues at Western Reserve Land Conservancy and the Soil and Water Districts, I think, still help folks work through some of those state and federal programs to purchase easements. There are a lot of tax benefits. I think there's other presenters that are coming after me that will talk about those in specific, but basically, the easement value is determined by a third-party appraiser. Right now, let's say the easement's worth $1 million, and after the easement goes on, the property is devalued by $400,000. So that difference of $400,000 is what that easement would be worth, and you can take that as a federal income tax deduction over the course. I think it's still 16 years or the year that you do it, in 15 additional years. We could talk about the percentages as we go. Agricultural easements are very similar to conservation easements, but they are very much focused on working lands and agricultural lands. So you can have a conservation easement that has some agricultural allowances, but if you have 100 acres of corn and beans or pasture land or an orchard or even a working sugar bush or a timber stand that you're managing, an agricultural easement sometimes is a better fit. It's more focused on protecting the agricultural values as opposed to the water resource and the conservation values of the timber. So we typically do these on traditional farms, nurseries, orchard vineyards, working forests. Again, they can allow for building envelopes and site-specific oil and gas drilling. These are typically a little larger, 40 acres or greater, what we like to do with agricultural lands, but we do make exceptions for smaller niche agricultural activities like nurseries, orchards, and vineyards. A lot of those are very high producing revenue generating, but on small land areas. So we do make exceptions sometimes. Again, these are typically donated, but they can be purchased. And there's different federal income tax deduction rules, which we'll talk about. I think the next presenter will talk about that. But those are how agricultural easements work. And so what we typically do is I'll meet with a landowner, somebody calls us and they're interested in easements. We talk to them on the phone a little bit. We talk about what their goals are for their property and what their goals are to protect their property. This is a tool, again, for you to be able to protect your property after you don't own it someday. Someday you are going to die and it's going to get transferred, either transferred to your heirs or sold to somebody else. This is a way for your protection to outlast your lifetime. And again, these easements are in perpetuity. So I talk to a landowner that calls, we meet on site, we walk, the next step is to meet on site, walk the property, look at some maps. I get an idea of what the goals are for the property, whether you want to timber or not timber. You want to drill for oil and gas or no? Do you want to have agricultural areas? Maybe you want to do that to stay in CAUV, maybe you don't. So everybody's got a different idea. So we custom fit and tailor these conservation easements or agricultural easements to what the landowner wants to do, and the land trust helps facilitate the exact terms of that easement. And once those terms are put in place, they're there forever. So we take our time with this and we really ask a lot of questions and make sure that we get it right up front so that we don't have problems on the back end, because once the easement goes on, you can't really change your mind, and it's sort of protected like that in perpetuity. And it's very comforting to some people. That's exactly what they want. To other people, it's option limiting in some ways. And so easement may not be the right fit. And we want to understand that up front, and there's never hard feelings either way. So we negotiate this easement back and forth. Our attorney will draft an easement document up. We present it to the landowner. We go over line by line everything that's in that legal document until we get it to exactly how we want it. Then we work on what's called a baseline document report, which is a series of maps and photos of the property to describe the property. This is a requirement of an IRS easement. It's not required on non-IRS easements, but if you're taking the tax deduction, you'll have to do the baseline report. We work to do that project with our staff, create that document, and those documents, once they are finalized, our board of trustees will approve them, and then we sign it with the landowner, and then we get it recorded to the deed. And those restrictions are on the property forever. And every year we come out and conduct our monitoring and stewardship inspections. We like to meet with the landowner. We like to walk the property with the landowner. We answer questions. We're available all year. If there is any questions, maybe you reserved a building area and now it's ready to, you put your barn in or a new house or something like that. We come out and mark the area where that can happen. It was all predetermined. Or maybe you're ready to do a timber stand improvement or a cut, and you're required to have a timber plan put together and then also a cut plan. We'll review that and talk about where we're crossing the stream and where the log landing area will be and how it's going to be cut, and make sure everything looks good. And then you go ahead and do your cut, and we monitor along the way. If there's any problems, we work it out, and usually about 99% of the time, it's not a big deal. So these are tools, and I think that's the big thing that I wanted to kind of drive home here. And I know I'm kind of up on time here, but these are tools that the landowner has the ability to protect their property in the way that they want to protect it beyond the scope of their lives. And so, again, that's very comforting to some people, knowing that the family farm will always be 100 acres in there. And even if it's not in the family, somebody else will use it as a family farm. But other people say, yeah, maybe I want the option open. So when Walmart calls, they'll pay me $20 million for the property. Maybe that's what I want to do and keep that option open for my heirs. In that case, maybe the easement isn't for you. So We try to figure that out in the beginning so that we don't get too far down the road with the process. Okay, that was sort of the nutshell of conservation easements, how they interact with woodland stewardship a little bit. And I certainly am available to have a discussion with anybody that wants to even talk about this. We can talk about some of the fees that are involved and the goals and everything else. This is sort of a quickie presentation on this. There's a lot to go over. If you're serious about doing this, feel free to give me a call. I would love to talk to you about it. And you know, I've done, I don't know, dozens and dozens of these now, and they're all unique and they're all different and they're all very much led by the landowner and the goals of the landowner. My job is to not, you know, push my opinions on what you should do and can't do on your property to you. It's really for you to decide, and we see if that can fit in sort of the frame of a conservation easement or not, and hopefully we can and get another acre protected somewhere. So. I guess that's it. Are we going to do questions now, or should we wait till the end, or how do you guys want to do that?
So while it's fresh in their minds, if anybody has questions for Brett, and just so everybody knows, this presentation is being recorded, and then we will also be emailing out the resource list, which will include all of our speakers' contact information, their slideshows, and anything else that they are able to share with us. So you will all be receiving that as well. Do you have any questions? Okay. Not seeing any, Brett. So if anybody has any, we'll keep monitoring the chat. So
Yeah, no problem. And I'll be here at the end to answer questions too after everybody else presents. So,
perfect.
okay.
All right. You can, Neil, if you want to start sharing, and I will read Neil's bio. So our next speaker is Neil Clemens. Neil has been in the financial planning field for more than 40 years. He holds his chartered financial consultant, chartered life underwriter, and enrolled agent tax license designations, demonstrating his commitment to a holistic planning process for his clients. He enjoys helping his clients bring order out of chaos in their financial lives by guiding them through a focused process that inventories and objectively evaluates their assets, identifies and prioritizes their goals, and helps them build a coordinated plan that allows them to envision and work toward reaching the goals that are important to them and their loved ones. Neil has offices in Cleveland, Columbus, and Canton. He lives in Walnut Creek, Ohio with his wife Stephanie of 34 years and his dog Buddy, and enjoys spending time with his family, being outside on long walks and following the Indians games and spending time in Florida. I think we'd all like to be in Florida right now. It's cold out there. So Neil, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds very good. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I think I might be struggling just a little bit to get the full screen version of this on Teams as well. I'm sharing my screen, but it seems like it's not.
It looks, yep, it looks good on our, at least on my end, it looks good.
It does. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Sure. Wonderful. Well, again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you. We didn't have anything on the shelf specifically to Woodlands, but there's a lot of cross application when it comes to agribusiness and farming. And so the area that I'm focusing on this evening is a will does not a transition plan make. And so we want to talk a bit about the importance of planning and did that advance? Can you hear me?
It advanced. You're good.
Yeah, it did.
Okay, perfect. So a few important things that we need to share just in terms of standard disclosures. Also, here's my contact information. I'm happy to take questions as well, but obviously the nature of the type of material that we're covering, it's difficult to get specific in a situation like this. Would be more than happy to have a conversation for those more specific questions afterwards as well. As far as our agenda for the evening, we are planning to look over the Why Nationwide? Some of the resources that they have provided and developed over the years that are very useful in this area. We want to talk a little bit about the typical estate plan, regardless of whether it's made up of just woodlands, not just woodlands, but consisting of woodlands, or other types of assets. The area that I focus in on has to do really with the planning process and the importance of that in order to maximize the likelihood of a favorable outcome. True transition planning we're going to talk about, and then a few items in terms of summary. I also wanted to back up just a moment and share that I am coming from the work that I do in serving clients from an independent standpoint. I don't work for a particular company. Nationwide is one of the partners that we integrate, particularly in this area, because of their commitment to the agribusiness community and the resources that they've developed that allow us to serve them in the way that we do. But we are very focused on helping people take an inventory of what they currently have, identify and prioritize their goals, and really work through that planning process that we're going to get into a little bit more here in just a moment. I'm also in the Ramsey system, Dave Ramsey system. I'm one of his advisors, and certainly we would be more than happy in terms of addressing questions at the end. Talk a bit about why Nationwide and some of what Nationwide has developed. In terms of the background of Nationwide, there is just a tremendous history in regards to Nationwide and their support of the agribusiness. They were founded in 1926, so we're coming up on the centennial next year. In 1955, the name Nationwide was adopted to reflect growth goals, but the original promise has remained. In 1982, Nationwide acquired Farmland Insurance, which is now Nationwide Agribusiness, which is the country's leading farm insurer. And in 2011, they launched the Land as Your Legacy program. And it was really intended to help focus in on some of the unique needs and concerns of those in agribusiness and the importance of working with someone who's familiar with those and who is also committed to helping people work through putting together a plan so that they can have the most favorable outcome in meeting their goals and objectives as possible. There we go. So a majority of Nationwide's board members are actually active farmers. And so we're coming from the perspective of not just being aware of the needs, but living it. And the chairman of the board is an active farmer as well. The state of farming today. There is a lot of need in this area because over 2 million farms operate across the United States, and the overwhelming majority of those are family farms. The average age of the owner is about 60. So time is critical when considering, transition planning and the importance of giving those areas attention before an event develops that forces the outcome, if you will. Let's take a look at the typical estate plan, because the typical estate plan yields typically terrible results. And Steve is going to be talking a little bit more about that in just a little bit in the next section or segment of the presentation. We want to talk a little bit about what does the typical estate plan look like when it comes to farms and the general approach. We're looking at Bill and Sue Jones here, and they're owners and operators of a third generation farm. They have 3 adult children. One child, John, currently works the farm. The other 2 are currently off of the farm in other occupations. Whoa. Did I just lose the presentation?
Yeah, stop sharing.
I don't know why it did that. Hang on one second. Yeah, I was just advancing and away it went. So Bill and Sue have the family farm, and when they die, what happens to it? They love their children equally, so they want all of them to share in receipt of the farm. David is actively farming it. John, David, and Lucy, their daughter, all get equal shares in the farm. But what happens in a situation like that? Oftentimes you have conflicting goals and objectives. One child wants to develop an organic yak farm. John wants to continue farming it. And Lucy wants to sell it for development. And so you've got conflicting issues in regards to how that develops. Many people look at that and they say, well, it's not really a problem because our will is going to control everything. Not so much. Oftentimes people are not aware that the only thing, and I'm not giving legal advice here by way of disclaimer, but the only thing that your will is really going to govern are assets that you own in your name alone. So property that you own jointly, other types of assets that you may have, like life insurance, IRAs, or annuities that have named beneficiaries, your will has nothing to do with those. Those are going to pass either by virtue of the titling of that asset or by the beneficiary designation that you may have listed on that asset. So it's important to be aware of that and to make sure that those beneficiary designations mirror what you want the outcome to be. There's also the question of ownership, because over time, let's say that Bill has passed away, Sue is still living, and she wants her daughter to be on her bank accounts for ease of being able to pay bills and provide guidance and oversight and just assistance with taking care of those type of things. And so she goes down to the bank and they suggest that they put the daughter on the account. Well, if she's on the account in an ownership structure, then when Sue passes away, that's not going to pass according to her will. It's going to pass by the registration on that account. Some of the other things that are important to be aware of are just contractual obligations, leases, other types of loans, mortgages, other obligations that are tied to the property. Those can be complicated if it is not something that is factored into the way that things are structured and making sure that they're consistent. So a transition plan is definitely more than just a will or a trust. There we go. 85% of those in agribusiness do not have a succession plan. Let me say that one more time. 85% of those in agribusiness, according to a recent Minnesota study, do not have a succession plan. And clearly, that is not likely to provide the kind of outcome that that most people are looking for. So the question becomes, are you part of the 85% that doesn't have a plan right now, or are you part of the 15% that has done more than just having a will or a trust put in place, and has actually worked through an in-depth process of identifying your goals, looking at the unique concerns that exist in your situation, and working with someone who can help coordinate all of the different variables that go into making sure that the bases are covered. The legal bases are really, really important, but they're only one aspect, and there can be limited aspects of what those documents will actually govern. Basics for a successful transition plan, taking a look at your objectives, goals, listing the various assets that are involved, and also just formulating a very clear definition of what success looks like in your particular instance. The other thing that we don't really go into very much on the slides, but it is very important to also be aware of, would be any type of special needs that might exist among the children. Proper planning in that area to make sure that there isn't any complication by possibly kicking someone off of government benefits because they receive an inheritance. And also making sure that things are protected from the standpoint of threats like divorce or lawsuits, things of that nature. So I want to also talk a little bit about the importance of the different people that are involved in putting a team together. I like to emphasize the importance of the planning process. I also like to emphasize that it takes a team of people. It involves, you know, people like your banker, your insurance agent, your attorney, certainly, your accountant. And I would say that someone like myself coming to the conversation as a financial advisor, as a financial planner, is in somewhat of a unique position to be able to coordinate all of this. Our work with clients oftentimes is more proactive than maybe some of those other occupations can be, or professions. And generally, it is the financial advisor who will help you through the process of taking that inventory, developing a plan, and then coordinating with the other professionals the way that things need to come together, and kind of keeping the checklist of all of those different areas to make sure that the ones that are most critical and important for your situation are ultimately covered. And certainly communication is absolutely critical, both from the standpoint of communicating within the family. I like to do family meetings, particularly when the planning process is done, so that there aren't any surprises for the beneficiaries, and making sure that they are aware of what the plan is. That just has a tendency to oh, did it kick me off again?
Yes, it did.
I don't know why that is. I mean, my internet connection seems to be fine, so I'm not sure why it's doing it. My apologies.
We're just gonna keep blaming Teams.
Yeah, really. So let's see. There we go. So some of the different areas are, you know, basic business planning, risk management, financial independence, estate planning, and succession planning. I mean, these are all areas that we would cover in your typical thorough plan, going through the process of identifying what the concerns and goals are, gathering the data, putting a plan together, going through the process of looking over potential solutions, implementing the ones that seem to be most ideal for your particular situation. We have a checklist. This is another resource that Nationwide has put together that we use particularly with agribusinesses. Nationwide actually has a department that does a lot of the work on the plans, that has extensive background in agribusiness. Many of the different tools that we use are provided or supported by Nationwide as well because of the unique concerns. There's also a questionnaire that we put together called Let the Farm Speak. It's a great exercise for families to go through, for the parents or the owners to be able to communicate what their goals and wishes for the farm are, and to allow that process to bring into focus what some of the next best steps are toward working to reach those goals. So in summary, why Nationwide? Because of the extensive background and commitment that Nationwide has to this community. There's problems with the typical estate plan if it only consists of a will and a trust. And it's important to incorporate much more than that, and to have it coordinated by somebody who can bring the other professions into the conversation as they are needed, and so in doing that sooner. So all of those are very important aspects to consider when it comes to looking at that. So here's some information on contacting Land as Your Legacy. It'll be in the material that's sent out. Again, thank you for the time this evening, and here's my contact information. Certainly, if you have any questions, particularly about the Woodlands, I do have some background in terms of doing conservation easements as well. And those can be a great tax planning tool. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me by email, phone, or text, and I would welcome a conversation. So with that, if there are any particular questions relating to what I've covered, or if you'd rather Mandy to save those till the end, whichever is fine.
All right. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute or put it in the chat. I do want to take a minute, just because I feel like this is very, very important. I do know there are several Farm Bureau members on here. Nationwide is a Farm Bureau member benefit. And so there are many financial advisors across the country who support this program. But as a Farm Bureau member, you do have exclusive access to a select group of elite professionals like Neil, who have been carefully vetted by Nationwide. And these advisors are not only passionate about agriculture, but they also bring deep expertise and advanced financial planning. And so through your Farm Bureau membership, we do help connect you guys with the right advisor. It helps save a lot of time and money and helps you plan and work through those really difficult decisions and that you have to face to help protect your farm and your property for future generations. So just want to put that little bit of a plug in there. I still don't see any questions. So I am going to go ahead and switch over to the next. Sorry, I just put my water. The next speaker. And so he's Steve Kosurski. So Steve, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Okay.
And Steve Kosurski is the owner of Kosurski Tax and Business Services, LLC, a tax and consulting firm located in Hartford, Ohio. Steve is a CPA and has worked in the tax and accounting industry for 27 years. He has extensive experience working with family-owned and closely held businesses across many industries, including agriculture, real estate, and manufacturing. The firm focuses on providing tax compliance, consulting, bookkeeping, and estate succession planning services for businesses. Steve is a member of the Ohio Farm Bureau and serves on the Trumbull County Farm Bureau Board as treasurer and public policy chair. In addition, Steve manages a over 1,000-acre grain farm with his dad and nephew in Hartford, Ohio, where he raises corn, soybeans, and wheat. So Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mandy, for the introduction. I guess just to confirm, the slides coming through okay?
Yes, they are good to go.
Okay, excellent. Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. As Mandy mentioned, I am a CPA, sole practitioner. I've had my own practice now for about 3 years. Prior to that, previous 11 years, I worked with some local firms here in Northeast Ohio, and prior to that, to being here locally, I spent about 13 years down in the DC area and worked for a couple different firms down there. Most of the time was spent with one of the national firms, just outside of DC. So, kind of quite a array and background, I guess, when it comes to tax and estate planning. and things of that nature. So, for my presentation, I mean, I do have some topics and items on my slides that you'll see that have already been covered by Brett and Neil. And but I guess I really want to focus on some of the tax aspects and also things that I see with clients that I work with and have worked with over the course of the years I've been in practice. For the most part now, I'd say the majority of my client base is ag related and or landowners. So that's kind of the niche that I focus on. Although I do have other industries that I focus on as well. But anyway, let's dive into the presentation. We kind of already covered a little bit about me and the practice. Besides the basic tax compliance and preparing tax returns, I do payroll services and bookkeeping and also estate and gift planning, which we're going to focus on here this evening as we go through. When we look at transition planning, as Neil mentioned in one of his slides, the average age of the American farmers around 58 years old, and so this is kind of a big topic when we're looking at transition planning and the amount of people this affects, and it's really been a hot topic over the past few years just because of some of the potential tax changes that were scheduled to occur. We'll kind of get into those in a little bit as far as where we're at now. One thing that's not talked about too often is the farms and landowners need to consider, at least those that are working with a bank, if you have any sizable operation and is you may, as the landowner and elder generation, have a good relationship with, let's say, Bank A, but does Bank A have a good relationship with the heir or heirs that are going to take over the farm or the land? That's always something to consider, because I know I've had instances in the past, and we've had clients where maybe that next generation is just let's say not up to snuff to run the farm, and Bank A is nervous, and when it comes time to get a loan, maybe they aren't as willing to work with the next generation as they were with the elder generation. What's different from farmers compared to most businesses is the majority of their assets generally are tied into land. Whether that be raw farmland, tillable acres, or woodlands. When we look at a farm's balance sheet, that's where the majority of the value is in that real estate, and so it's a big component to consider when we're looking at doing any sort of transition planning and how to move those assets to the next generation, assuming the next generation wants to continue the farming operations. The other thing too that I'd point out is it's always important to look at how those assets are titled. Whether that's the assets are in you're in your spouse's name individually, or they in an entity, and how those assets are titled are going to also sort of dictate what we need to do from a transition planning standpoint to get those through to the next generation and minimize tax consequences. And one very important point, and Neil kind of touched on this in his presentation, is the basic estate plan. That I always like to say, fair is not always equal. So in Neil's example, he had a classic basic estate plan where the mom and dad wants to give each of the three siblings, three kids, 1/3 share each of the farm and the operation. And although that is a plan, and probably the easiest plan to do outside of not doing anything, that generally that's not a plan for success. I personally had a client here about a year ago that that was the plan. The plan was in place before I got involved with them, so there wasn't much I can do, but mom passed away. She got dementia and went pretty quickly, unfortunately. Dad had already passed, and the way the plan was set up was each of the three kids were going to get a third. Well, all it takes is one kid to throw a wrench into that plan because they want to cash out, let's say, which is what happened in this case. And then next thing you know, the auctioneer is called and there is no more farm. So as we go through this, I guess you need to consider that, who's going to get what, and you might have some off-farm heirs that play into this, and maybe they're not the ones that are going to get the land. Maybe you have a life insurance policy or other investments that's going to go to them, and the person or heirs that have been working and involved in the farm over the years, they're the ones that are going to get the farm and continue it, so they don't have to deal with off-farm siblings or try and buy them out, because it's very hard to do with current land prices and also where current interest rates are with trying to obtain a mortgage to do that. Um, so some of these items have already been covered, but I guess two that I'd like to point out on this slide is consider your power of attorneys. You want to make sure that you've kind of thought that through, and whether it's financial power of attorneys, healthcare power of attorneys, make sure that you meet with a good estate planning attorney, and these are drafted up, so and those are on file. And you want to be careful too, who has the power of attorney, especially on the healthcare. You probably don't want to have the person maybe or the heir who is, let's say, in need of money, as an example. It may not be a good idea to make them the power of attorney on the healthcare, because you probably don't want them pulling the plug on you, or doing something prematurely. So you really want to sit down and think those out. And then, as far as, when we look at, the overall transition planning, I guess, three things that, years ago when I was working with a particular partner, and I was at a meeting, and one thing he said kind of stood out to me, and that was, point 7 there, that when we talk about transition planning, there's three things really to consider that we're going to kind of go into a little more detail, is taxes, privacy, and control. And when we look at taxes, there's, basically your state and income tax is what I'm going to focus on. Privacy, when we're talking about that, the main thing is avoiding probate, and that kind of gets back to how we want assets titled to avoid that, because anything that goes through probate, one, is going to be a pain, a lot of time, and two, it's public record. So not too many people want their dirty laundry, so to speak, or laundry in particular, out there in public, in a matter of public record. So that's very important. Then control, the big thing is, again, deciding who's going to receive the assets and when, and how things are going to be divided up. Whether we got to look at off-farm heirs and how they should be compensated, and other things of that nature. And Neil kind of mentioned this, had a slide on this. It's important to have a good team of advisors to help you accomplish your goals. Any good estate plan, I would tell you, is not something that's going to be resolved in one meeting, and it's not going to be resolved with just an attorney or just an accountant or a financial advisor, etc. I mean, you really need to have everybody on the same page. The last thing that you want to do is go out and go to the attorney, sign a bunch of documents, put something in place, and then go to your accountant after the end of the year, and then he finds out that you've created a tax mess, which unfortunately I've seen happen. So make sure everybody's on the same page, and you have the documents reviewed and go over everything prior to putting pen to paper. So on the tax side, really, when we look at taxes, there isn't too much to worry about per se, just because of where the exemptions are, and some of that is because of as I mentioned earlier, there was some concern with some of the original Trump tax cuts that were set to expire at the end of this year, and was kind of in the news and came up in the election cycle last year, where the federal state tax exemption was supposed to revert back to levels adjusted for inflation and what they were before Trump's first term. Well, you may recall there was the one big beautiful bill that was passed in July, and part of that big beautiful bill was I guess what we can say permanent, at least from a tax perspective, permanent, increase in the exemption to the federal estate tax. So, for 2025, it's 13.99 million, meaning if you passed away and had assets under that value, there is no estate tax. For 2026, you can see it's going to be bumped up to 15 million. And permanent, I guess just keep in mind that nothing's really permanent when it comes to the tax code. There can always be legislation passed that changes this, and it's always something that is being considered and looked at. So. And then, if you are in a taxable estate situation, the tax rates can range from anywhere from 18% all the way up to 40% of that estate's value that's over the exemption amount. Now, at the state level, there is no Ohio estate tax that you have to worry about. So that was repealed back in starting in 2013. So you're good there. Income taxes, there could be some income taxes depending on how things are titled and flow through out of the estate. If you have income producing assets, like let's say some investments, or if you do have a business interest that's not titled correctly to get out of the estate quickly, the estate may need to file an income tax return and actually report the income that is generated by the assets the estate held before they get transferred to the beneficiaries. So if you have gross income over $600, that may be a requirement. And then the big tax thing, when we look at transition planning and things to consider, is the step up a basis of your assets when you pass away, because this is a very powerful tool that's available to a person. And I know it was kind of under attack in the last administration. There was a lot of discussion of eliminating this. And I know that's one of the areas that Farm Bureau fought hard to make sure that was was kind of axed and did not come to fruition. So when we talk about basis step up, there's this applies to any assets, whether it's investments or real property, or if you have any like if you have a farm business and you have farm equipment, buildings. And so what that allows you to do is as long as you own assets personally or in certain types of entities, you can step up the the basis of that asset to the value at the person's date of death. So for example, let's say you have a piece of property that you had purchased years ago for, well, let's just use simple round numbers here, $1,000. And now you pass away, and let's just say, just keep things simple. Let's just say it was owned individually, so only one person owned it. So, and it's now worth $10,000. So if you had sold that piece of property the day before you passed away, you would recognize $9,000 of taxable income. So the 10,000 minus the 1,000. But if you waited, so if that property is not sold until after you passed away and it goes to your heir, let's say whoever the beneficiary was, and they sell it the next day after they take possession of it, well, that property now has a tax basis in it. After you pass away, it gets stepped up to that $10,000. So if they turn around and they sell it for $10,000 the next day, there's no taxable gain or income that they will need to report on the sale of that property. So it's a very powerful tool. Now, in the case of land and timber and equipment and buildings, if you have a business, in some cases, a lot of those assets may be fully depreciated, like if it's equipment or buildings. When you step up the basis in those assets, you're allowed to then start depreciating them again. So there could be some sizable tax deductions there when looking at this basis step up. And then the one thing on the land and timber I'd point out is that it's important to even though land is typically not deductible, the cost of land, there are components of that land that could be. So, if you have tile in the land, any structures, the buildings, fencing, for example, and then, as I mentioned, timber, if there's a lot of value there, you want to try and get that pulled out. So, like the tile or fencing can be depreciated. And then if you have plans of selling the timber, if you have marketable timber there, if you can establish a value on the timber, knowing that, well, I'm going to sell it in a couple years, and let's say you pull out, in our example of the land that's worth $10,000 now, let's say maybe 2,000 of that relates to timber. Well, we can allocate that of the 10,000, 2,000 to timber. So when you sell it in a couple years, you have that as cost basis to help limit the taxable gain from the sale of the timber at that point in time. So, So it's a very, very powerful tool. Now, you have to be careful, though, how the assets are owned. I know a lot of estate planning attorneys that they love trust and want to put people in trust. You got to be careful there's all kinds of different trusts that are kind of outside tonight's presentation that we could talk about, but in order to get the basis step up, you have to maintain control of that asset generally. So if you contribute to a trust and you no longer have control over that asset, generally you're not going to get the basis step up. Same thing if assets are in a corporation, which, by the way, you never want to own land in a corporation. Do not do it. There's really no good reason to have it. Typically, when we're talking land, real estate, timber, we want that stuff in an entity that's taxed as a partnership, or maybe a single member LLC, a limited liability company, or just you own it individually. Keep in mind, as far as the basis step up goes, that you need proper records to substantiate the values that are going to be used on the tax return, especially if you're counting on additional depreciation deductions. So things need to be appraised. For the real estate, you need to have a real estate appraiser come in and do it. Especially if it's any sort of a large estate, and we're talking large acreage. Because I've had clients that have gone through this, and I've had 7-figure deductions, basically, deductions over $1 million from this basis step up in some cases, by just being able to redepreciate stuff and things of that nature. Same thing on the Woodlands. You want to make sure you work with a certified forester to go through and document what trees are there and the board feed, etc. If you're going to plan on trying to pull out any value on the timber side of things. And also, too, keep in mind, if you have any of the assets within an entity, that entity will need to be valued itself, because your interest in that entity is going to be part of your overall estate, and so it's important that gets documented as well. Because if you ever get audited, that's one of the first things the IRS is going to ask for or look at is to see how those values were determined, and make sure that they were done in a proper fashion. And as I mentioned, tax benefits are potential additional depreciation, and also limit the taxable gain if the assets are eventually sold by the beneficiaries. Just a couple points on the conservation easements, and kind of add to what Brett had talked about earlier. From a tax standpoint and tax reporting standpoint, a couple things you should know if you're considering it. I know personally we have done on one of our farms a conservation easement. We actually sold a conservation easement. And so I know that worked out pretty well. I mean, the biggest thing is, and I know Brett covered this, is just knowing that this is for perpetuity. So once it's signed, I mean, there's really no turning back. So you really got to put a lot of thought into this. But on the donation side of things, as Brett mentioned, you're going to get appraisal done and going to determine what that value is. It's going to get reported as a tax deduction. And part of that reporting, there's going to be some additional time and compliance with the return for that year. In particular, the donation gets reported on a form 8283, and then you're going to need to get the appraiser, as well as the recipient organization will need to sign that particular form. And then also, too, a copy of the appraisal will need to get submitted with the return in the year contribution. And as Brett mentioned, I mean, there is a carryover period. If you don't use all of the deduction up in the first year, you can carry it over up to 15 years. So that's important. And the other thing, too, is if you're looking at this as from a tax planning standpoint, and going through the contribution route, the one nice thing is that if you're donating an easement, and you can get a pretty sizable charitable contribution deduction, without actually really having to pay out much in the way of cash. A lot of times farmers at the end of the year, this time of year, as I'm working with clients doing year-end planning, they want to know how much money they need to spend. Well, in this case, I mean, you can kind of go through this and donate the easement. I mean, there are some fees associated with it, like the appraisal and such, but the size of deduction you can potentially get is a very powerful tool. Now, I will say is that it's not something you want to decide to do on December 1st, because, and I'm sure Brett can attest to this, that this takes time. I would say clients that I've had go through it, it's probably a 6 to 12 month process. Because you got to get the appraiser, and sometimes it's not easy, getting the appraiser scheduled, and it's not something that's going to get done in a couple weeks. So just keep that in mind if you're looking at doing it for tax purposes. Um, and then the big thing is just consider the tax savings versus the easement restrictions long term. I mean, because this is a way to kind of control your property if you go through with it. But as Brett mentioned, I mean, are you going to handcuff future generations down the road if I think Brett had mentioned, like, Walmart or somebody coming in that's gonna buy that property. That could be a very sizable windfall that you've basically taken away from beneficiaries down the road if you end up going through with it. Uh, Privacy, as I mentioned, the big thing is just titling assets, and this is where you want to work with your attorney and your accountant as far as determining what makes the most sense. With real estate, LLCs, limited liability companies are very popular form, and at least with that, it helps with if you have multiple members in there. If you pass away, well, the LLC is going to continue until it's shut down. Versus if you own land individually, well, then you got to go through and change the deeds and file all the necessary paperwork with the county. With having the real estate owned by an LLC, it's the entity that owns it. So having one member pass away doesn't really affect that, and also it avoids having to go through probate. You also don't forget about the basic items like your bank accounts and how those are titled, and having somebody on there, or have them to transfer on death, so your hopefully spouse or heirs can whoever is executor of your estate can get access to stuff, so bills still get paid, because creditors are still going to want to get paid after you passed away, if you have any. And then designated beneficiaries, which I think Neil had covered. You don't forget retirement accounts, and that's if you have any IRAs or 401ks at work. Those can easily be forgotten if you don't have the beneficiary listed and or updated. So make sure that you're reviewing those. As far as control goes, again, kind of touched on this already as far as there are some aspects of when we talk transition planning, things that you can do to determine who's going to get what, to make sure the farm stays intact. When we look at the legacy of the farm, a lot of times, this is something that is, a person has been in the family for years, and they spend a lot of time, blood, sweat, and tears, putting in to maintain the land, that they want to make sure that's going to continue going forward. So, there are ways when we talk about control, things that you could do, in particular from like if you set up a trust, for example, of who's going to get what and when. You can put age restrictions in there, and I've seen it's typical is, especially if you have younger heirs, that you put restrictions on when they can get stuff, and maybe they'll get a certain percent when they turn 25, and then another percent when they turn 35, and then 45. Things of that nature. I guess when I talk about control, that you typically see and would want to consider. I guess a lot of it depends on your comfort level of the next generation. I mean, obviously everybody's different, and some people may not. You may not want to give up control and give it to them, and so that's always a discussion to have to see who's going to run what, and are they going to be able to get along to keep the legacy of the farm moving forward. And again, I can't stress this enough that fair is not always equal when it comes to transition planning and estate planning. That it really need to sit down, and there are going to be some tough discussions. I know people sometimes don't like to have the confrontation, and and the thought process is always, well, I'll be gone, there'll be somebody else's problem, and don't be in that situation. Or you always want to try and it's very important to try and sit down and work through that, again, to make sure that the farm continues and is a lasting legacy. So with that, that's all I had. If I guess we'll open it up to questions. I mean, here's my contact information. If anybody does, want to get a hold of me after the fact, here's my email and phone number, and be happy to take any questions.
All right, I do have a question here. Could you explain again how someone can use timber on their property for depreciation?
Well, the timber wouldn't be, no, the timber wouldn't be depreciated. I was just, when I was talking about, I assume it's, from the slide when I was talking about the basis step up, you would be calculating basis on the timber value related to the timber just from the standpoint if you were to sell it, to use that cost basis or the new cost basis or value at the date of death would help reduce some of the taxable gain from selling that particular timber. So now the depreciation comes from the equipment in the buildings and the tile on the land, not the timber.
Okay, perfect. All right, do we have any additional questions? Feel free to unmute yourselves or stick your questions in the chat. All right. I'll just cover some kind of wrapping up things real quick in case anybody thinks of anything or is having problems getting unmuted. It's okay. You can also blame Teams. So, but just a reminder that we'll send out a event survey, and then we will also send out the resources. So it will probably be early next week when you get those. So watch your emails for those. And you are you're welcome to share that information with anybody who may need it. And it'll also be on, I know for sure, Geauga Soil and Water and our Farm Bureau pages, that we have a whole list of our Woodland Wednesday resources that we are able, any of them that we do in person or have resources that are made available from the last several years. So we are very excited. We're actually going to be planning our 2026 Woodland Wednesdays here soon. So in that survey, if there is anything that you would like to learn about next year, please include that in your survey. That'll help us as we do our planning next week. So thank you all for joining us and bearing with us on our tech issues. So we really appreciate everybody for being here tonight. So thank you all and have a good night.